let's go deeper on this ownership mindset. Remember, the system is going to work for you. You don't work for the system. You can even say that on the other side of the screen here. I'm going to make this system work for me. I'm not going to work for the system. Being an owner is part of this, but there's a big difference between being an owner and a speculator. As an owner, what you want to do is build yourself a big group of assets, of different kinds of assets ideally. So remember, there are two kinds of assets. There are financial assets, and then there are real assets. Let me give you some examples of them. A financial asset is something like a stock or a bond or an index fund like I just talked about. There are many types of financial assets. A CD that you put into a bank, that's a financial asset. Now, there are also real assets. So these are things like ownership of your own business, ownership of property, maybe your home, maybe an investment property. So there are a couple of benefits to owning financial assets. First of all, financial assets are liquid. So what liquidity means when it comes to money, you've probably heard this term before, is that you can basically get cash from your asset very quickly. For example, let's say that you have purchased that index fund for $1,000. 4 years later, you want to sell it and it's worth $4,000. You can basically get that $4,000 in your bank account the same day or within a few days, depending on what your system is set up like. The other benefit to financial assets is that there are some ways that you can tax optimize with financial assets because the government wants you to save for your retirement. So essentially what they do is they allow you to pay less taxes to encourage you to accumulate wealth for your retirement into popular retirement accounts. There are certain retirement accounts designed to help out small business people, certain retirement accounts optimized for employees of larger corporations, and you're going to need to do some further research. You can look in the Financial Empowerment Study Kit for some examples of these retirement accounts. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper into the world of stocks and bonds and financial assets. So there are probably some very simple financial assets that you know about, like a checking account or like a CD, which is a certificate of deposit. But let's go to the next level. We're going to look at beginner level financial assets, intermediate, and advanced. All right, so on the beginner level, what you want to be looking for are financial assets that are extremely diversified with low fees. That's why index funds are very popular. That's what I mentioned to you earlier. So an index fund will take your money and spread it out to all the companies in the stock market on an automated basis so that you have a balanced exposure to the stock market. All right, you can also get index funds for bonds. So the difference between a bond and a stock is that a stock is a share of ownership in the company. A bond is when you own a little bit of debt in a company or a government. So bond funds tend to be very, very low risk. And the other thing about bonds is that they tend to pay dividends. So every so often you'll get a little bit of cash. Maybe you reinvest it, or maybe you just take it out and you put it in your pocket. Now, when you get comfortable and you move into the intermediate level, then what you can do is you can start getting comfortable with investing in what people call an investment hypothesis. So for example, let's say that you believe that healthcare technologies are going to be really good companies to be invested in for the next 10 years. So there are some things that you can use to give yourself exposure to lots of healthcare technology companies. I'm going to give you an example of a technology exchange traded fund. So an exchange traded fund is called an ETF. What that means is that basically you're investing with a company that has an algorithm to spread your investment in some predetermined way. They tend to be very low fees, and it allows you to sort of basically invest along with your sort of ideas about the economy. Similarly, there are mutual funds that will do that. And the only difference between a mutual fund and an ETF is generally that a mutual fund is run by people, which also means that mutual funds tend to have higher fees. So in general, people tend to prefer the ETF route because you don't want to lose your wealth to fees. Now let's get down to the advanced level of investing. So when you're really comfortable with investing, that's when you might do things like pick an individual stock. Picking individual stocks is risky because if that company has something go wrong that you weren't planning on, it can blow out your whole investment, right? Also at that advanced level is where people start looking at things like options and hedge funds. Those are very advanced financial instruments and financial assets. In general, you don't really want to worry about those things. You want to focus on buying good quality assets that you can hold on to, and a good quality financial asset tends to be things like ETFs or index funds or bond funds, or things like real assets like property. So to wrap up this owner's mindset module, let's look just for a minute at real assets, things like property or owning your own business. So the thing about real assets is that you have a lot more control when you own the property. For example, let's say that you buy a little condo near the center of your community and you rent it out. You can decide to fix it up and then rent it out for a higher price if you want to. You are the steward of that property, so you can be there with your eyes, you can see it. And I can tell you that as I've gotten a little bit older, I have really started to prefer real assets. Here's the secret about being an owner, okay? When you own something for a long time, you don't pay transaction costs. Transaction costs can really eat away at your wealth. Remember the example that I told you earlier about the real estate agent and how much they get when they sell your $500,000 house? $25,000. That is a lot of money. That's a down payment on another property, right? So the secret to being an owner and finding good assets that you can hold on to is that you don't have to think about it unless you're, doing some type of, upgrading to a property that you own or whatever. But in general, you hold on to these good assets over time, and then you find out one day that you have quite a lot of assets, hopefully that are diversified between financial assets and homes, etc. So in summary, you have the choice of two kinds of assets, financial assets and real assets. The main benefit of financial assets are that they're liquid, meaning you could cash them out quickly. Real assets like property or a business that you own give you more control, but less liquidity. Invest to own, not to flip. One of the easiest ways to lose your wealth is through expensive transaction costs.